everybody. Welcome. My name is Jennifer Bosom, and I'm the chair of the SPSP training committee this year. For those of you who don't know, the purpose of the training committee is to provide emerging, developing, and evolving scholars and professionals with training on cutting-edge topics and methods to maximize the impact of research in personality and social psychology. That is a mouthful. This year, Samin Vazir and I took as inspiration for the training committee symposium the topic of promoting research integrity. As many of you are aware, the topic of research integrity has been somewhat of a sticky wicket of late in our field. Several high-profile incidents, and I need to do the quotation marks, have brought some not very flattering attention to our discipline, raising questions about the quality of our work and the credibility of our reputations as scholars and scientists, especially scientists. And although the media furor over these incidents may be overwrought, as media furors often are, this nonetheless seems like an excellent time for some serious self-reflection as a field. So our speakers today include Laura King, Brian Nosek, and Sanjay Srivastava. Unfortunately, Barbara Spellman could not make it, but we do have some slides that we can show you that reflect a summary of her talk. And each of our speakers today will offer insights and suggestions for rethinking some of our practices, doing high-quality research, maintaining our integrity, and being the best scientists that we can be. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Laura King, who will talk about ethical boundaries in research design and scholarly communication. You are not stoppable. Hold your applause.
Thank you. I think I just want to make it clear that I'm going to be sharing my opinions about some things that you may or may not share, that other people who know me may or may not share, that APA may or may not share, that JPSP may or may not share. So I just want to make it clear that I'm speaking from my own experience. One of the, as Jennifer just mentioned, right, we have had all these terrible things, right, a whole host of very bad, unfortunate events. The Stapel scandal, the Santa scandal, the Smeester scandal, an ESP paper was published in JPSP. And people are writing about these questionable research practices, and we have this replication crisis. And people have often, in my opinion, far too often, blurred the lines between these various events. They are not the same. They have the same valence. I mean, it depends on how you feel about the Venn thing. For me, they have the same valence, but they are different things. What Stapel and Santa and Smeesters did, in my opinion, is qualitatively different from these other issues. In my opinion, the Venn paper being published in JPSP is an example of a problem in the editorial process and a breakdown in scholarly review. These questionable research practices is what I'm going to mostly be talking about today. That is not, interacting with data is not the same thing as inventing data. When social psychologists responded to the Stapel scandal by saying, well, in some ways we all do this, they were wrong. I don't know anybody who does that, as far as I know, right? I mean, raise your hand if you do. No, making up data is a different thing. It's not a slippery slope. It's a very gravel-covered uphill slope from what you do every day to this other thing of literally inventing data. You are not Stapel if you read about questionable research practices and say, oh geez, I've done that. Oh wow, whatever. I think it is very important for people to maintain that boundary because it makes people feel like criminals. So if you lied about, let's say lie, right? If you have a covariate in a study and you say in the paper, we're covariating this out because it makes sense that we should, here's the theoretical rationale, when in actuality, you're covariating it out because when you were messing around, you found out that if you covariate it out, the p-value would be less than 0.05, right? That's dishonest, that's inappropriate, and we talk about that issue in a minute, but that is not the same thing as not having the data there, right? All these things that people do, that people question, or that we recognize are inappropriate, are not the same as inventing data. And when people lump these together, it makes it seem like if someone comes along and says, I was really interested in your work, I want to replicate it, what you hear is, you are Stapel, and I'm about to find that out. We start to look at replication as a threat, as some horrifying thing that means someone suspects that you're Stapel. You are not Stapel. Right? So here we have Stapel, questionable research practices, and then science. I think there's a big difference. I really do. I think interacting with data is a qualitatively different activity than inventing data. However, there's a boundary between questionable research practices and science. Science is about creating knowledge. It's not about publishing. It's not about getting a high impact factor. It's not about getting tenure. It's not about getting a job. It's about gaining knowledge, about gaining replicable information about the world to help us understand and predict human behavior. Questionable research practices do not serve that function. But this other thing, which I'm calling ERPs, I realize that usually means something else. The E here means exploratory. Exploratory research practices are part of science. I'm going to suggest that if we think about these questionable research practices as explicitly exploratory research practices, they become much less problematic. I believe that these questionable research practices, dropping a condition that you ran, including a covariate that you really didn't know was going to, a priori was going to matter, including the kitchen sink in the study just to cover your bases so you don't have to waste time, those are problems with research report, in my opinion. And when we report those kinds of practices as if we are the omniscient author of our work, we are lying. And that needs to stop. If we want, so I think when I talk to people, especially friends of mine who are social psychologists about these issues, they get really like, well, you don't understand, it takes forever to run a study, and then you expect us to know everything beforehand. If we knew for sure that it was true, why would we even run the study? And when we interact with the data, we find out new things. Exactly. When we interact with the data, we find out new things. That's called exploratory research. And I suggest that people should proudly engage in exploratory research that they explicitly admit is such. This is an opportunity to knock yourself out. Do all the things you want to do. Go get yourself a large data set that tests the general ideas you have about a phenomenon. And do whatever you want, right? Standard operating procedures. Include the kitchen sink. Well, it might be this covariate, but it might be this other one. That might actually be a moderator. Well, here's our DV that we have. Yeah, but you think it's only going to affect that? Let's throw the kitchen sink at this problem. And you're going to do this the way a personality psychologist would do an exploratory factor analysis. That means you need to have a lot of people. You're going to get a large sample, and you're going to know that this is your playground. You are going to interact with these data and find out what they have to tell you. You're going to have conditions in there that ultimately, in the end, you're going to drop as you continue to analyze. You might p-hack away. This is your chance to hack those p's. You're going to see, well, what's going on here? That data set is there to play with. Don't worry about all the degrees of freedom you're flushing down the toilet every time you run an analysis. This is an explicitly exploratory an enterprise. But you're going to keep track of what you hacked, what you decided not, what you're doing, right? You want to keep track because you're listening to what the data have to tell you. And then you're going to do this thing, right? You're going to sit back and say, whoa, we thought this playground is telling us we're wrong, right? We suspected that this playground is saying, yeah, that's actually a good idea. You're going to play with those data to your heart's content and let them tell you what they have to say about the thing that you're interested in. I believe that such practices aren't Q, they're E. In an explicitly exploratory context, it's perfectly fine to do all of these things. You know that's what you're about. You're not engaged in a confirmatory enterprise. This is an important step in research, right? It's one of the most fun things to do. It allows us, finally, to actually have a conversation with the arbiter of truth in our world, which is to say, data. They have things to tell us that we don't already know, right? But this conversation is explicitly exploratory. It is fun, but you cannot then later pretend that you knew all along what you found. You didn't. It's super dumb to pretend that we don't know what we do about the human search for confirmatory information and our capacity for post hoc justifications. We know we're the people, you're the people who've documented this truth. It's very easy for someone to see something and say, oh yeah, I knew that all along, right? Hindsight bias is incredibly powerful. We know that. And even smart people fall prey to it. This is a paper we published in JPSP showing that cognitive sophistication does not attenuate the bias blind spot. We see bias in others, and no matter how smart we are, we tend to not see it in ourselves when we're doing it. If you have engaged in an exploratory analysis of a large data set, you're not allowed to say, well, we kind of did know. We wouldn't have included that variable if we didn't think it was important after all. And it will take a couple of minutes and you'll be completely convinced that this is what you knew all along. It's simply not the case. We have to be mindful of the fact that we've engaged in an exploratory analysis and we should be presenting it as such. Once you have what this giant data set, the exploratory data set has told you, now it's time to confirm those findings. Now it's time to really put your money where your mouth is. This is the moment to say, now, I had a conversation with these data, this is what they told me. Can this actually be true? In some ways, this is not about replicating what the exploratory study showed you because that's not a finding from that exploratory study, right? You just mess with those data to beat the band. When you design that confirmatory study, that confirmatory research, you're going to use the knowledge that you gained from the exploratory analysis, but you're going to design a study that literally tests the prediction now that you actually have. And you are not going to include conditions that you might drop, and you're not going to include the kitchen sink. But you are going to design replicable confirmatory studies, and by replicable, I simply mean larger N's than people typically do. As the editor of JPSP, one of the most shocking things to me has been, this problem, right? If you have access, let's say, you have access to exactly 100 people, you really shouldn't be planning on running 5 studies with 3 or 4 conditions each. That is inappropriate. It is simply inappropriate. If you have access to 100 people, I would like to hear about the one study that you ran with them. So here's the idea, right? Pretty simple. You're going to run an exploratory study or studies, and you're going to run some confirmatory study or studies. And in your manuscript, they will both appear. Here's the idea. First, you're going to write your introduction a la BEM, in the way that you maybe would do anyway, right? You're going to write the theoretical conceptual argument that supports the conclusions you know are to come. But then you're going to present study 1 or 2, whatever they are, these exploratory studies as explicitly exploratory. You need to do that because the truth is the ideas that you're presenting in the introduction don't make sense. They don't follow from the pre-existing literature. They follow from a conversation you had with that exploratory data set. That data set, if it were a person, should be a co-author on the paper. It's what told you to go down this road. I think those things should be presented and be explicitly labeled as exploratory, and they should be presented honestly and fully. Then you present confirmatory studies that are presented as designed to specifically test the conclusions that were suggested by those exploratory data. Those studies, and only those studies, are truly confirmatory, and they have to be designed to test the prediction that you've made. That sounds like I'm harping on something everybody should already know. And so you're going to do this, an explicitly exploratory research with this sort of hunch-driven research, explicitly confirmatory research, and then you're going to balance your good story with this other thing, which is called the true story, and you're going to err on the side of truth. You're going to, you know what? Don't write the paper that Ben told you to write that presents the good story that you have to share. Go ahead and bore me, the editor, with what you really did, and then backtrack. If I tell you cut it, then you can cut it. I want to do, just very quickly as I end up here, about one of the serious implications of this blurred distinction between questionable research practices and what Stapel did, and it is the meaning of replication. You're not Stapel, but you might be Matt Bess. Matt Bess is a former University of Missouri graduate student who was a faculty member at Ohio University, and he published a paper in Psych Science. And how much happier could you be, right? Super excited. And then he was contacted by these folks who said, we're trying to replicate your study, can we have all of your materials? He graciously provided them. They ran their studies, doubling his power, and they failed to replicate his effect. And then the editor of Psych Science invited Matt to reply, would you like to write a rejoinder? This is actually some praise for Matt that appeared on David Funder's blog, Funderstorms, in which he said, this is how it's supposed to be. Because here's what Matt did. He said, thank you, but actually, I'm cool. This is what science is. I appreciate the opportunity to reply, but it looks like they did a good faith effort to replicate my work. I sure wish they had, because I was really excited about this finding, but this is what science is. We can't be afraid. When you get the email from someone saying, I want to replicate your work, we can't be afraid of people giving that a shot. We believe in the notion that science is self-corrective. If we really do, then we can't be afraid of someone trying to replicate our stuff. You're going to be more likely to find your work replicated if you've actually tested your predictions with samples that are powered enough to show what the actual effects are. To my friends who are experimental social psychologists, I have to tell you, I've come to this conclusion. There is no harm that will come of an overpowered study. Why are you running 100 people per cell? Because I want to know the truth. The only thing that's sacrificed is my time and resources. I feel like to avoid a lack of replication of my work, that's something, okay, I'll take it. And I want to encourage you to think about this balancing of expediency and convenience with actually finding out what the truth is. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you. I recognize Joe Hilgard.
I wanted to highlight the importance of pre-registration for confirmatory research and just put in a plug for Open Science Foundation. You can pre-register your hypotheses and make this confirmatory experimentation clearly confirmatory.
Right, this is this new thing, right? You can pre-register. And what I would like to suggest is that you feel really good about running your exploratory study or studies and pinning down, okay, here's what the predictions will be, and then why not pre-register them? you'll get a gold star, whatever. Everyone will be really impressed. I think, no, we actually know now. But I strongly suggest that you don't discard those exploratory data when you present the studies in a manuscript. You can put them as supplementary materials. Those data deserve credit for guiding you in what you've done, and it's important for other people to know you did throw the kitchen sink at this problem, and so they don't have to. Yes?
Thanks for confirming that we're not Stapel. But everyone tells me I look like Snowden, so if you could confirm on that, I'd appreciate that too. I was with the introduction, Ben would have us derive all the hypotheses that we didn't actually know until after the data. It wasn't quite clear. Do we derive the hypotheses that the data ended up telling?
Yeah, so here's my idea. So the idea is, how do you write an introduction, right? I honestly think that you almost write your BEM introduction because you're building the conceptual argument for the prediction that you will have ultimately tested, right? So you write that case that you know is the prediction you're actually going to do. Now, I personally have no problem with people including predictions that were wrong, developing an argument that turns out not to be true. But the idea is, even though you've set up this introduction that puts forward those predictions, you stop, right? And the preview to study one admits, okay, so these are exploratory ideas, right? Even though they make a lot of sense now. And study one was this crucial stage, and you can be honest, that it's in interaction with these data that we came to these ideas. We all like to talk to data, and we should be allowed to talk to it, but we have to admit that that's what we're doing, in my opinion.
So you're making explicit that the method, that study one came before the introduction.
In some ways, exactly.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yes?
Yeah, I just wondered if you've thought of the idea that sometimes things aren't categorically confirmatory or exploratory. Sometimes things fall in between. And so perhaps we need sort of Bayesian models where, when something falls in between, it has a lower degree of certainty than when something is explicitly confirmatory or explicitly exploratory.
I guess I don't know quite what is that middle thing. What is that thing?
Well, it's, you have a hypothesis space that you're searching, and it's constrained to some degree, but not.
I think that's exploratory, in my
certainly,
opinion.
yeah, certainly. But I mean, I'm just saying, computer scientists do this all the time, where like, when you are searching a smaller hypothesis space, then you believe it, you don't believe it 100%. We shouldn't believe any paper 100%. But you believe it more than you do something that searches a larger hypothesis space. And there's room for that, not thinking of it categorically, but thinking of it more as a continuum between exploratory and
maybe.
confirmatory.
I guess I would say that I think that all computer scientists might do it all the time. I think that what social psychologists do all the time is something more about pretending in your head that you knew. Pretending, we kind of knew that was true. That's why I think that is exploratory. I think as soon as you crack open the data, right, you test for your main effect or your interaction that you predicted and it doesn't come out. As soon as you start the next thing, you've moved off of the confirmatory.
I don't disagree.
We have to
okay.
wrap it up there.
Sorry.
There might be time for more questions after all the speakers.